So Peter invited me to give a talk about how to publish as an undergrad. My talk will hopefully I'll get through all of these, but it's going to be broken down into 5 parts. So first I'll go through some preliminaries. Second, I'll talk about how you can choose a topic for your paper that you want to publish. Third, I'll talk about how to do research and how to outline or what an outline would look like. Fourth, I'll talk about the writing process. And fifth, I'll talk about the submission process and what that looks like. So first off, some preliminaries. One caveat here is that, what I'm going to be saying is going to be mostly geared towards publishing in philosophy. That's all I have experience with. A lot of what I'm going to say is going to be translatable into other disciplines that you guys might want to pursue, but some of it might be specific to philosophy. A second thing that I want to cover as a preliminary is why publish as an undergrad? So why do you guys think one might want to publish as an undergrad? Yeah.
It's a good way to start cultivating your reputation if you intend to keep going into philosophy.
Good. It's cultivating a reputation. Any others? Yeah.
Experience.
Right. It's very good experience. You kind of know the ropes early, as it were. Any others? Yeah.
Maybe engaging conversation. If you publish an opinion piece and someone responds to me, you can engage in complete conversation. Yeah.
Good. Conversation. Getting your ideas out there and kind of staking that flag with your intellectual views out there. Taking charge of your intellectual life, showing others some maturity, showing your intellectual development, your initiative. I think these are all really good. I wrote down some reasons. One, I think it's just fun. I don't know. I like writing papers and whatnot. Maybe that's kind of lame. I also think it's just deeply intrinsically valuable. It's just rewarding in and of itself. You're advancing human knowledge when you publish papers. You are learning things yourself. You're developing intellectually. And you're cultivating extremely valuable skills. It's also really good for grad school applications. So if you want to go to grad school in philosophy or some other discipline and you're publishing as an undergrad, that's going to give you a significant advantage over other people. And finally, it opens doors. So you'll get arguably better letter writers and more glowing letters for applying to grad school. You'll get the possibility of co-authorship with people who work on the exact same topic as you. You'll be able to correspond with various philosophers and kind of put your name out there. Yeah.
So if you were, let's say, majoring in philosophy, would you be required to write these papers, or would it just be optional?
Good. That's very good. I was going to get to that, but you are anticipating things very nicely. It's not required to publish, certainly as an undergrad. In your classes, you're going to be writing lots of papers and whatnot, but only a small minority of undergrads in philosophy will publish, but it's something that definitely can be done, and these are just some tips for maybe how to get the edge over your classmates, as it were. So a few other things. So in terms of preliminaries, have realistic expectations. So acceptance rates at top journals tend to be very, very low. Usually less than 5% of papers get accepted, which are submitted. And you don't need to publish as an undergrad to get into a philosophy program, and you don't even need to do it to get into a top philosophy program. It just makes you a much better candidate. Some final pro tips in the part 1 on preliminaries. First, avoid ego-driven publication. Don't do this just for ego gratification purposes. Have a scout mindset as opposed to a soldier mindset. So this is something that I think Julia Galef introduced in her book, The Scout Mindset, where, see yourself and your intellectual journey in your publications as more exploratory, and maybe think of yourself as a kind of scout, trying to explore the truth and trying to discover things collectively with other fellow inquirers who are also publishing papers, even on topics that, and questions that you disagree with them with respect to their answers. See yourself as a kind of collaborator with them. Instead of seeing yourself as a kind of soldier going out to try to win others in battle and bolster up your tribe and beat down people of the opposing view. And then the third pro tip that I have in this preliminaries section is just keep in mind that your worth is not tied to your publications. Publication is not the same thing as being worthy, and not getting a paper published is not the same thing as being unworthy or having less value as a human being. Your value is not tied to your publications. Okay, onwards we march to choosing a topic. How are we to choose a topic? Well, I think the best thing to do, at least for me, and Noah could probably attest to this, is just to read. That's probably the number one way. You can use coursework, too, as an opportunity to develop ideas into a publishable paper. I mean, one tip is just to like spend some time looking at like the most recent issues or volumes that various different journals publish. So there are lots of different philosophy journals. You could find a list on what's called, I'll write this up here. Look up Leiter Report, Philosophy. And that'll give you a list of some of the top generalist journals of philosophy. And a generalist journal is just a journal that publishes in pretty much any area of philosophy that would be of interest to philosophers. So that's where you can find a list of some of the best journals, and when you go to their websites, you'll see some of the most recent issues and volumes, and you'll see the sorts of work that's going on as of late in philosophy. You can also notice what's being cited in various philosophy papers that you're reading and follow up the citations or the references. And that'll give you a good sense of what the literature looks like, where you can go next in your reading and whatnot. There are also really helpful general introductions and literature reviews that we have in philosophy. So there's this, there are 2 resources here, 3 actually, that are really good. One is called the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy gives excellent introductions to and like literature reviews on most significant topics in philosophy.
Even many insignificant ones.
But even many insignificant ones as well. But like there will be an SEP entry on fine-tuning arguments, which we talked about. There will be an SEP entry on the problem of evil. There will be an SEP entry on divine gibbonness, which we talked about. That was my sincere seeker argument. There will be an SEP entry on religious experience. So like, and anything pretty much in philosophy. Well, not quite anything, but another resource like SEP, maybe is a bit more introductory, is the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy. Both these are freely available for anyone who wants to read things online. And then a final one is a journal called Philosophy Compass. Philosophy Compass, which publishes, I'd say, like undergrad-friendly introductions to various topics in philosophy and literature reviews as well on topics. Those will be super helpful for generating ideas and finding resources to develop them further. I also recommend having like a mentor here, and this is actually my number 1 tip. My number 1 tip for all of publishing as an undergrad is to get some kind of mentor. Go up to one of your professors, be like, hey, I'm interested in such and such a topic. Let's say this is in philosophy. Like, I'm interested in this particular topic. I've got lots of thoughts about it. I've started reading up on papers on it, and I have a kind of goal. Maybe at the end of next year, I want to have published a paper on this. Can you be my mentor for that? And a lot of them will see that initiative, and they'll be like, oh my goodness, I need to foster this, and I'll serve as your kind of mentor for that. So you can bounce ideas off of your mentor. They'll read your paper. They'll give you feedback. They'll help you with the submission process, where to submit, things like that. They'll point you to potentially undergraduate conferences where you can present papers. They'll point you to relevant classes, which will develop the ideas further. That's my main tip. If you take anything away from this talk, it's that you should have a mentor. It's that simple. Okay. Preferably, so what are some qualities of a good mentor? One is that they specialize in the area that you're interested in, that you might want to publish in. Most of the major mainstream institutions will have philosophy faculty members who specialize on most of the main areas in philosophy. And a second condition that I would say is, so firstly, they're like a specialist in the area that you want to perhaps publish in. And secondly, you guys kind of work well together. So, you vibe, you riz, whatever the kids are saying these days.
Maybe not that.
Okay, maybe that has some like romantic connotations. Yeah. So maybe you don't riz with them. Well, I guess we'll know. Let's kind of guess it.
What can you really do to mentor?
Right.
Or
Oh yeah, that's how I got so successful. Was I was rizzing, but no, okay. No, okay. I did not riz with it. I learned that that's probably wrong. Okay. I've already gone through the list of top generalist journals, but I'll give you a little glimpse here when you're trying to choose a topic. Again, just do a bunch of reading, think about these, talk with your classmates, talk with your mentor, present your ideas with others. It's through conversation that we develop ideas, that we hone them, and that we test to see whether or not they're kind of new, which is a kind of condition on publishing in philosophy. Places where you can, other ways that you can find papers. So I mentioned just going to some of the volumes and the issues for journals, but you can also search up papers on specific topics. So you can go to, I usually use 3 or 4 different places. So one is just Phil Papers. It's just a huge repository where philosophers upload their papers. A second place that you can go is, of course, Google Scholar. You can just search up relevant keywords on an argument that you're interested in or a particular topic that you're interested in, and you'll be able to find papers on that. Another one, of course, you've probably seen this, JSTOR, very similar, kind of like a repository. And then thirdly, another repository where people upload their papers is academia.edu. Academia.edu. Okay. Another thing you can do to generate ideas is to watch or listen to YouTube videos and podcasts. This, like, I kid you not, like many of my papers, or at least some of my papers, have come about as a result of like listening to philosophers talk about their research and like, oh my gosh, that's like related to something that I'm working on, and now I'm seeing it in a new light, and I've got a new idea for this. So, and I listen to podcasts and philosophy videos and whatnot, ones that are actually genuinely quite interesting in between classes, when I'm doing the laundry, when I'm doing the dishes, when I'm raising up my mentor. I'm just always listening to philosophy podcasts and philosophy videos. So, I don't know, it's that sort of constant exposure, the constant intellectual engagement that will kind of spark your curiosity and will help you develop ideas for papers. As I already said, talk with friends, professors, join a philosophy club. And when you read these papers, look for like a puzzle therein, or like look for some kind of paradox or some tension or some underlying assumption or something that's bugged you in a reading. That's like a nudge to, hey, pursue this a little bit further. Or look for like counterexamples to things that the author is saying, or look for connections to other debates or concepts or topics or methods that you're aware of. Try to pinpoint underlying assumptions that the author or authors are making. Okay, so that's kind of how to choose a topic. There are also some desiderata that your topic should meet in order to be publishable. So one is that you want the topic to be manageable. So you want your topic to be able to be such that you can kind of undertake a task of writing a paper on it. So, a paper is usually between 5,000 words and 12,000 words in terms of published papers. Usually they're around 8,000 words. And you don't want to have as your topic like, does God exist? You're not going to be able to explore that adequately within that constraint. You want your focus to be much more specific. Try to accomplish one main thing. So, for example, defend one thesis, propose and defend one counterexample to a theory, develop an important objection to one influential argument for an important thesis. Notice that these are much more restricted. So, like, you could take the multiverse objection to the fine-tuning argument, and you could see whether it commits some particular fallacy that people have been talking about. That's a very specific topic. Like, we're within the question of does God exist, we're within a particular argument, the fine-tuning argument, we're within a particular objection to that argument, the multiverse objection, and we're within a particular response to that objection, namely, if it commits a certain probabilistic fallacy that Noah talked about yesterday. And there's like a kind of small literature on it, but notice how much more manageable that is compared to the question of like, does God exist? So you want it to be manageable, specific, focused, and you also want it to be novel. So you can't be reinventing the wheel when you're publishing papers. You need to actually contribute to human knowledge in some new way. Well, how to tell if you're doing that? This is where you need a mentor. Your mentor is going to know the literature well, and they're going to be able to tell you, oftentimes, or at least, they're oftentimes going to be able to tell you whether or not this is a new or novel idea and significant enough to be publishable. But also, they're going to have the tools and the capabilities to be able to find out whether it's novel. They're going to be an expert on doing the sorts of research needed in order to find out whether or not someone has said this or made this point already. You can also email people who specialize in the area to get a feel for whether you have a novel argument or a novel objection. Philosophers love it when an undergrad is aware of their work and wants their feedback. And also, again, read yourself. I mean, as you yourself gain more acquaintance with the relevant literature, you'll see the moves that people have been making, and you'll become better positioned to know yourself whether what you're saying is new or novel. Okay, so your topic needs to be manageable, it needs to be novel, it needs to be focused, it needs to be specific. It also needs to be interesting and significant. So maybe you connect one debate about the fine-tuning argument to other debates in some interesting new way. Or maybe you provide a new spin on a perennial question of philosophical interest. Or maybe you provide a really new and interesting argument or objection to a super influential argument that's been convincing lots of philosophers as of late. these things are significant. It's not terribly significant if you, for instance, you can't publish a paper saying like, hey, this philosopher made a spelling error on page 4. Like, okay, that's not terribly interesting or significant. Two final things that are desiderata for your topic. One is you need to interact with extant literature somehow, so your topic still needs to be like anchored in an existing literature so that you can engage with other philosophers who have published on it. And then finally, another desiderata is what I call finding your niche. So a niche is, well, what's the definition of a niche? Yeah.
It's like a little indentation in a wall,
Okay.
but it's or more, less literal.
That's pretty literal.
That literal sense, it's just a very specific area of interest or focus of what we're.
Right, and it's one that maybe your abilities are especially attuned to, right?
Yeah.
It's like animals have niches, which they've kind of evolved to, or adapted to, yeah, right, be good to survive in those places, and they thrive in those places. So finding your niche is really just finding some literature or finding some topic that I think isn't well trodden already, but still has a little literature on it. So maybe a handful of papers on it, which you can then master. You can become an expert in that particular literature because maybe there are only 5 to 10 papers on it. You can read all of them and become a master on that particular topic because the topic isn't well trodden, and which is such that you have new and interesting thoughts about it. I think that's the magic bullet. I mean, I know you're asking me for like a magic bullet. I think that maybe there are two. One is have a mentor, and secondly is to find your niche. Find some area or aspect of literature which is not well trodden, and which is significant. You can contribute new things, so you can master the topic, and which you yourself have interesting and new thoughts on. One final thing I'll say here is that it's actually easiest to do a response paper, especially in undergrad. This will sort of get you into the publishing, I was going to say business, but it's not really a business. The publishing
Game.
The publishing game. Good. Wonderful. This is why we have Peter. So, what's a response piece? Well, it's exactly what it sounds like. You find a recent paper that's been published in preferably a top venue, which again, go to the lighter reports in philosophy to see what those venues are. And you just essentially pick apart that particular argument that's contained in that particular article. Maybe you'll connect it up with other debates, but you want to have interesting and new, convincing responses to what the author is saying. And if you can do that in a response paper, journals are very, very open to response papers. They love it when people are actually reading and engaging with stuff in their journal. Okay, so the overarching goal here of part 2 is to settle on a very specific, very clear, cutting-edge, significant, but manageable topic which fits within your niche. Okay, that's all of part 2, summarized in one sentence. On to part 3, research and outline. So, how are we to do research? Well, read a lot. That's kind of like the first thing, is just to read a lot. Go to Phil Papers, JSTOR, Google Scholar, Academia, search up a particular topic that you're interested in, like the fine-tuning argument, or maybe the argument from evil that I developed. Well, that's going to have a lot of literature on it. Maybe pick a particular sub-area of the problem of evil, but and then do some preliminary source gathering on the topic so I'm assuming that you've chosen a topic. I should have said that. We're assuming that you've chosen a topic, and now you want to do some research on it. Well, you want to search up key terms related to that topic in these various places. So Phil Papers, Google Scholar, JSTOR, Academia, see if there's an SEP entry on it, see if there's an IEP entry on it, see if it's talked about in Philosophy Compass. And you want to just do some preliminary source gathering. Like, hey, this looks like it might be an important source. I have a document which is like preliminary source gathering document. And I just copy and paste tons of papers and whatnot in there. I mean, maybe not tons. Like, you don't want to do hundreds. But, something like a few dozen papers in there that you think will be really relevant to what you're going to be talking about, your topic. And then what I do, at least, is I go through that and I assess the relevance of the various different papers that I've come across and the books that I've come across in my research, assess how relevant you expect it to be to the topic and paper that you kind of want to write on. So maybe some of them only talk about the topic in one section. Well, then you can note that. Look at section 7.2 or something like that. Maybe some of them, it's like directly on the question that you want to engage. So like, you want to highlight this one, say like, I need to read this whole thing. I need to, take notes on this. My point is just that some sources will be more relevant and more directly pertinent to what you want to write about than others. You want to spend more time, of course, on the ones that are going to be more directly relevant. I then winnow down the list on that document by relevance. I cut off the ones that I think will be irrelevant or I don't really need to pay much attention to. I kind of categorize them into the ones that I only need to skim, the ones that I'll need to read but perhaps not take notes on, and then ones that are super duper directly relevant that I'll really need to engage, I'll say read and take extensive notes on. So I'll like separate those into different parts. So like these ones I just need to skim, these ones I need to read and maybe jot down a few notes for their general ideas, and another I need to take extensive notes on. So now I've imposed some order, and moreover I've eliminated the ones that really aren't terribly relevant to my topic. After I've done that, I've got a kind of sifted and organized list of sources. There are kind of two ways to go here, and I don't know, I just kind of vibe whichever way I want to go on any given occasion of writing a paper. One way to go is to start outlining and then maybe even writing the paper, and then where relevant, consult published work. So just to get your ideas down, and then, is there an objection to this? Well, then go to those sources that you marked as directly relevant and read those, and then modify your paper accordingly, or modify your outline accordingly. That's one way to go. Another option, which I tend to prefer, is to just read all of these things first. So skim the ones that I need to skim, read the ones that I said you need to read and maybe take general notes on, and then go through the ones that I wanted to take extensive notes on, and actually take the extensive notes. This will also help you, generate your ideas. And when you take notes, you're not just writing down what the author is saying, you're writing down sort of your commentary as well. So like, author makes this argument, but that assumes such and such a thesis in this other area, but that's really controversial and there are lots of objections to it. And in fact, the author also said something that contradicts that thesis, so like, that as well. So it's like a kind of critical commentary on the paper. It's all good.
Sorry.
You missed the part where I was saying we gotta rizz up our mentors.
Oh my god.
You missed the best part, I'm telling you. So, once I've done all the reading, anyway. Once I've done all that reading, then I will make an outline. And this is where kind of all the magic happens. Outlines write the paper for you. So, I've given one piece of advice, which I said is super duper important, have a mentor. I've got a second piece of advice, which is find your niche. That's another super important one. But I think the third thing that I want you to take away from this is that outlines write the paper for you. Make an outline. So usually what I like to have on an outline is I break it up into different sections. So like here's a typical philosophy paper outlined. The first one would just be like, you'd break it up by section. So your first section would be introductory section. This would typically consist in, firstly, a literature review. So what kind of things have other people said on the topic that you're speaking to so far? So you do at least a relatively brief literature review. You show that you're engaging and you're aware of the relevant literature on the topic. Secondly, you state your own thesis, your new and interesting thesis with those desiderata that I mentioned from earlier. Thirdly, you state why that thesis is significant, like why your reader should care. And then fourthly, you give at least a brief outline of the rest of your paper. So that's all in the introduction. The next thing you might give is like, well, hey, there's this topic that I'm talking about. Here's the opposing view. So here's my explanation of the opposing view. That's just that section. Then the next section could be like why the opposing view is wrong. So you give your main objection or worries for the opposing view. The next section could be where you articulate your view on the topic in question. After that, you give an argument for your view. So like, why is my view right? And then this penultimate section would be objections and responses. So you consider objections to your argument and your view, which you respond to. And then you have a concluding section where you just basically say what you've done, what you've accomplished in the paper. So that's basically like a general outline. And the way that I do it, I just sort of fill this out by paragraph. I mean, I sort of imagine like a main bullet point underneath one of the section headings corresponding to like a paragraph that I'm going to write. So it's like one main idea. Maybe I'll have sub-bullet points, talk about this argument on page such and such from this author, and then one bullet point, like make a crucial distinction that the author draws. Secondly, apply that distinction to the particular case that they're talking about. You get the point. I find that this really helps me keep track of the dialectic well. It helps me keep track of who has the burden of proof. So like, who is the one who's tasked with actually establishing the thing in the first place. If I'm writing just a critical piece, all I really need to do is just poke holes in the author's argument. I myself don't really need to prove positively the opposing view. I just need to say, hey, you haven't proved your view. That's typically for a response piece, but anyway. Outlines, my point here is outlines help you keep track of dialectics. And that concludes part 3 on research and outline. Let's get on to part 4, actually writing the paper. So again, the outline writes the paper for you, especially if you view the main bullet points as paragraphs that you're going to flesh out. I mean, once I have an outline, I'm like, oh, finally, like the paper is basically done. So it's wonderful. But here, in terms of like actually writing the paper, I guess we'll just give you a sense of some of the features of a good philosophy paper. So first is clarity and precision. I have my favorite saying, if and when I become a professor, it's going to be, I'm going to make t-shirts about it, and I'm going to like give the t-shirts to my students. Clarity is king in philosophy. That's one of my favorite mottos that I think I came up with, but maybe I didn't come up with it. But anyway, clarity is king in philosophy. That is the #1 virtue that your paper should have. If something is not clear to you, and if it's not clear to other informed students who are similarly positioned to you, then you need to clarify. You need to simplify things. You need to make it more precise, more clear, so that it's understandable. Another feature of a good philosophy paper is that you have simple and relevant prose. So we are not looking for fluff. So don't say things like, oh, well, since the dawn of time, humans have contemplated the existence of God. Oh. Don't say that. That's stupid, right? That's fluff. Get rid of the fluff. Get straight to the point. Be simple. Be clear. Don't be pretentious. That's what we're looking for in philosophy. Another feature of a good philosophy paper is to support every non-obvious claim that you make, or else flag the non-obvious claim that you're making as an assumption. That is crucial. Philosophers will rip you to shreds if you make a non-obvious claim without support and without flagging it as an assumption. So that is also pretty critical. Another important feature of a good philosophy paper is that you're actually like giving arguments, actually giving reasons to accept your view. If you recall from our argument class, an argument is a collection of propositions, one of which is the conclusion, and the rest of which are the premises which are offered in support of that conclusion. Arguments are the bread and butter of philosophy. This is another one of my favorite mottos, like arguments are the love language of philosophers. It's there is language. It's the bread and butter of philosophy. Philosophers trade arguments. That's really what they are pros at. Another good feature of a philosophy paper is to define every key term that you use. So just be very clear what you're talking about. That's kind of under clarity. You also need to signpost. So like tell people where you're going, what you're doing. So like now I'm going to explain this person's view, and then go on to explain it. Like you can literally say this. Noah can attest to this. Sophia can attest to this. Peter can attest to this. So when you're reading philosophy papers, they're like, now I'm going to do this. And then they do. So even though in high school you might be told like, don't say, I am going to tell you such and such, or now I'm going to do this. Actually in philosophy that's totally encouraged, because it's just giving the listener, or the reader rather, a perfectly clear sense of what you're doing, where you're going, where we are in the dialectic. That's called signposting. Another feature of a good philosophy paper is humility. So don't write in a kind of bombastic, triumphalistic fashion. Don't say you've decisively refuted the other views. You can say things like, I developed a pretty plausible objection. This seems like a pretty serious worry for the other view. Notice how that's much more humble. And also, it's just going to increase your chances of getting your paper accepted. Because who are the journals going to send your paper to? Who are the peers who are evaluating your paper? It's going to be the people that you're citing and interacting with and disagreeing with, right? So you don't want to paint them as silly, stupid, mean, demonic people. Instead, you want to be extremely humble with, well, maybe not extremely humble, but appropriately humble in your conclusions and pronouncements. Concision is another one. Charity is another one, so accurately represent people's views. Don't misrepresent them. That will get your paper rejected immediately. And it needs to be well organized. So that's where the outline comes in. What's also important here in terms of writing the paper is the revision process. So, I mean, here's a fifth takeaway. If a fifth takeaway, which is really important, and Noah, credit to Noah for giving this one to me. Your paper is not as good as you think. It's just not. It's not as good as you think. It's seriously not. Like, you need to remind yourself that your paper is not as good as you think. And that's going to be almost always true until you've revised it, like, many times, okay? So you need to get lots of feedback because of this. Lots of feedback, especially critical feedback, from people who don't hold back at all. That's how you grow. So like you should be telling your mentor, don't hold back. Like rip this paper to shreds. Like tell me where you think I go wrong, which parts are unclear, what I've done wrong. That's how you grow. And if you get knocked down, you get back up again. That's part and parcel of writing a good philosophy paper. So that's a crucial part of the revision process. Is your paper is not as good as you think, and get as much feedback as you possibly can. You can present your paper at conferences, you can present it at workshops, you can present it at reading groups, at your philosophy club, at your college, or all of these. Another thing that I really like to do is to read my paper out loud. It takes a while, but like you can find pretty easily whether or not it flows naturally, whether or not things are clear if you're just reading it out loud. I find that that's an amazing thing. I love that. Okay. Onwards we march to part 5, which is the final part in my talk. Okay. So this is on submitting your paper to a journal. So we talked about preliminaries, the kind of attitude you should take, why it's good to publish as an undergrad. We've talked about how you can choose a topic and the various different resources you can go to about that, and the various desiderata that your topic should meet. We've talked about how to do research for your paper, and what to put in an outline, what it might look like, and the benefits of making an outline. Once you've got an outline, you go into the writing process. I talked about the various good-making features of a philosophy paper. Once you've written the paper and you've done the appropriate revisions, right? You've done revisions after presenting it to your mentor and getting their feedback, after multiple rounds of revisions, after maybe going to an undergraduate conference, after doing various things. Once you've gone through all of this, then you're ready to submit the paper with the help of your mentor, okay? Your mentor should be guiding you throughout all this process. So here, yeah, I mean, again, this is really where you should be relying on your mentor. They'll know which journals would be more appropriate for your paper than others. They'll know whether your paper has a high enough caliber to be in certain generalist journals, whether you should aim a bit lower. They'll know these things, and they'll be able to guide you. But here are just some factors in choosing a journal. One is turnaround times. So in philosophy, our turnaround times are very, very slow. So, once you submit a paper, the reviewers, the referees who they send it to, those are the people who, read your anonymous paper, and they offer comments and they offer a decision of whether or not to accept the paper for the journal. Referees are typically supposed to get their papers back within 1 to 2 months. That's typically the time frame. But alas, they take anywhere from 3 months to a year, and sometimes longer. So turnaround times does matter. Some journals are notorious for having very long turnaround times. You can talk with your mentor about that. I think there are some unreliable statistics that you can get online for that, but I don't really go by those. Because there's a selection effect. The people that are the most pissed about their turnaround time are just going to go and, say this place is terrible, and that's anyway. So that's one thing to consider. Another one is like the quality of the journal, the prestige of the journal. Other things being equal, of course, you want to submit to and publish in higher quality and higher prestige journals. That's where the lighter report rankings kind of come in, and it's also where what time is it? Is it 7:43? Is that what time it is?
7:37.
Okay, so then this is oh, it's got an alarm set for 7:43. Okay, sorry. I was checking that. But yeah, anyway, quality and prestige, other things being equal, of course, you want to publish in a better venue than a worse venue. But of course, better venues typically have lower acceptance rates. So you've got to balance that against the next desiderata, or the next factor in choosing a journal, which is the acceptance rates. So again, like I said, the tippy top journals, which as an undergrad you're probably not going to be able to publish in that. That's extremely difficult. I was never able to make it into a top generalist journal as an undergrad. But those have like acceptance rates which are lower than 5%. So fewer than 5% of papers that are submitted get accepted, and oftentimes it's between like 1 and 3%. But for less prestigious journals, but which are still high quality and peer-reviewed, they'll have higher acceptance rates. It'll go up to 15, 20, sometimes up to 30, and some places are even higher than 30. Again, talk with your mentor here. Other things to consider, of course, word count requirements. You should, some journals like only publish short pieces, so Analysis is a really nice, really good philosophy journal which only publishes at most 4,000 words. And other places are available or amenable to even longer papers, like up to 15,000 words. And then finally, another factor in choosing a journal is whether it's a specialist or a generalist journal. So generalist journals, as I said earlier, are like open to any topic in philosophy, but there are lots of also specialist journals that specialize in philosophy of religion, or philosophy of science, or philosophy of language, or philosophy of mind. So depending on where your paper falls within that categorization, your mentor can direct you to the appropriate specialist journals. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the submission process itself. So, I mean, here the best thing that I can say is just to follow the guidelines on the journal's website. So, journals have websites, and they oftentimes have like information for authors or something, or like want to submit ? And you like click on that, and then it'll give you all the stuff like, you know, the font, all that stuff, where to submit. They'll have a portal or a submission site. Most of them will have that. Some of them still you have to email one of the associate editors. That's a pain. But really just follow the guidelines on the journal's website and use their portal. It's pretty self-explanatory. You have to anonymize your paper for peer review. So they send off your paper to anywhere between 1 and 4 external reviewers who are professional philosophers in the field who have kindly agreed to give up some of their time to look at this paper and most likely reject it. So yeah, that's all about. Oh, and you also have to usually submit like a title page, and that's usually for like the editors so that they know who submitted it. That'll contain like your information, your like name, your institution, your email, the abstract of the paper, which is just like a short summary of what you're going to do in the paper, etc. Okay, and then after you submitted, this is post-submission now, there are a few things that can happen. Firstly, you could get desk rejected. So that just basically means like your paper was on the desk of the editor, hypothetically, and they just rejected it. So like they didn't even send it out to external reviewers. Usually when that happens, you'll find out within like 1 to 4 weeks that your paper has just been desk rejected. They didn't send it out for comments. There are a few reasons why that could happen. I mean, one is just like a lot of these journals have so many submissions. They're just flooded. And so sometimes they really do just have to like, listen, we've got so much. Like, I'm sorry, just go somewhere else. Another reason why they do that is that it might just be outside the scope of the journal. So I mean, if you submit like a philosophy of religion piece to a philosophy of science journal, they're going to desk reject it. Like, what are you doing? Another thing is like they do have an initial quality check or a vetting check where they're like, the editors skim through it and like make sure this is like up to the quality of like a professional philosophy paper. Usually, if they're good philosophers, they can get a sense of that by just skimming it. And maybe like reading a couple paragraphs. So yeah, that's what a desk rejection is. And you could also get a non-desk rejection. So this is after if they send it out to reviewers and 1 or more of them recommended rejection, usually then your paper is going to get rejected. Editors at journals, who are the ones who like find the reviewers and assess their referee reports. So they submit usually like a 1-page report on your paper and explain why they rejected or accepted or whatever. The non-desk rejection, yeah, that happens, as I said, when usually at least one of the reviewers recommended rejection. And here I want to say a few things about how to handle rejection. I like this quote that I found. Every philosopher you admire has been rejected more times than you can count. More times than you can count. And it's very true. Like, it's just part of the process. Don't take it personally. Philosophy is difficult. Often they reject, as I said, simply because of high volume, or because the reviewer reports weren't glowing, or because, referees are oftentimes just stupid and they make dumb points and they're confused and they like misread your paper. Oftentimes there's not much you can do about that. So don't take it personally. Use the referee feedback to revise your paper because as you're going to submit your paper to another journal, they might send it to the same reviewer. That's a possibility. So you might want to revise your paper in light of the referee feedback, and then you just submit to another journal. So we talked about desk rejection, non-desk rejection. There's also a revise and resubmit verdict. So this can happen if like one referee recommends rejection, but like 1 or 2 or 3 referees recommend like acceptance. You might get a revise and resubmit where the journal's like, okay, we're not committing to accepting your paper, but have a second chance. Talk about what this referee said, and we'll see if you can adequately address what the referee said, and your paper will basically just go through another reviewing process. They'll typically send your paper out to the same reviewers, and we'll see if you're able to convince that other reviewer to change their verdict and accept the paper, and if you can, then your paper will be accepted. And it's also just an option to referees to just recommend revise and resubmit. Like, they think, like, yeah, this has a chance of publication. There are some serious issues, but maybe those can be addressed. And so I'll give you a revise and resubmit, and you'll have a second chance. Again, it's almost never a commitment to publish, but you have a much higher chance if you get a revise and resubmit. And then the two final verdicts you can get are conditional acceptance and unconditional acceptance. So conditional acceptance is like, the referee reports were generally really good. They just had a few minor hiccups, but your paper's accepted so long as you say something about them. But that's a basic guarantee of publication. And then unconditional acceptance is like the referee reports were just completely glowing, and your paper is just going to be directly accepted. That's extremely rare. Okay, those gone through all 5 of my parts. Just my final thoughts. Philosophy is about truth. It's not about trophies. Publishing you should see as a means towards greater understanding, greater knowledge, and service of others, instead of collecting trophies, ego gratification, those sorts of things. See it as a kind of act of service. Of course, it will help you, and that could be part of your motivation, but don't make that your whole motivation. Philosophy is about truth. So, that's all I got.